Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and today I am excited. I'm always excited about the podcasts, but this episode is fun because I have an interview with author Jason Pellegrini, who has written a novel called The Replacement and his newest novel called Booth. We'll be speaking with him in just a few moments, but I do want to talk a little bit about the book before we talk to Mr. Pellegrini, and we'll be, as I said, we'll be talking with him in just a few moments. So his newest book, which came out in November, is called Booth, and I'm going to give you the description that it gives us on Amazon, which says, "At the dawn of the day of his execution, Joseph Bateman finds himself reflecting on his life, one filled with poor decisions and evil people. Even his lifelong best friend played a pivotal role in earning Joseph his seat on death row. A phenomenon occurs as the electricity meant to kill Joseph is sent through him, and his essence is ripped from the body he has known his entire life and thrown into a new one. Only the body he now inhabits isn't new at all. It is the body of a person who lived over 100 years before Joseph's birth. Now living in an unfamiliar era of history and trapped inside a foreign body, Joseph learns he has been sent back for a reason. To earn redemption for his damned soul and to find a sense of peace he has never known. All he needs to do to get there is prevent one of history's most infamous murders." So that pretty much jumps right out and intrigues you right away, right? So this is a really interesting book, and when I was speaking with the author via email right after I finished the book, I told him that it was compelling, it was weird, it was uncomfortable, and I really liked it. So I wasn't sure what to think going in, and this, I hadn't read this author before, and I had read that his earlier novel, The Replacement, was a thriller and very graphic, and so I kept joking that I was going to have to stay up with the lights on and, only read this when my husband was home, because I was thinking it was maybe in the same genre as his first book, and it's not. It's a little hard to describe the genre of this book. It's a little bit historical fiction, a little bit supernatural, a little bit science fiction, a little bit even like character development, the development of a character, that type of a novel as you're learning about this character. And I don't want to give away too much because we will be talking with the author. It does touch on some, as I said, it was uncomfortable. It does touch on some uncomfortable topics such as racism. The language is not PG, just so you know, going in. There's definitely language in the book. It's always in context, but if you, like I, find yourself extraordinarily uncomfortable with the N-word, then just know that it is used in this book, but it is used in a way that helps to develop the character, develop the story, develop the plot, and establish all of these things that go into making the character of Joseph Bateman, determining how he ends up on death row, how he ends up going back in time, and to whom, and to which era, etc. Like I said, I'm not going to give away too much because you need to read the book, and we are going to be speaking with author Jason Pellegrini soon. So without further ado, I'm going to take our first break, but when we come back, I will be speaking with author Jason Pellegrini about his second novel, Booth. So stay tuned, and I will be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. As I mentioned before the break, today we are interviewing author Jason Pellegrini about his newest book, Booth, as well as his first novel, The Replacement. I'm so excited that he has agreed to be on the podcast. He is speaking to us today from his home in New York via Skype. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome. So we're going to talk about mostly about your newest novel, Booth, a little bit about your first novel, The Replacement. But before we get into that, let's just get a little bit of information about you. Anything that you'd like to tell my listeners about you as a person or an author or...
Well, I always, whenever I get asked this question, I'm always expected to give this grand answer. I feel like these interviews are sometimes like first dates. The truth is, I think I've lived a relatively normal life, and I think that's one of the reasons why I write these grand characters who've had this life, such circumstance and things happening to them. It's because, my life was boring enough. I might as well create something exciting. No, I've lived on Long Island my entire life. I, just like everyone else, went to school. Went to college, got a job, and then one day I decided I was going to be a writer.
Okay, so talk a little bit more about that. How did you get into writing?
In 2007, a friend of mine had published a book, Michael Somberth, Never Enders, if you want to check it out. I picked it up solely as support, and then I decided, I have the book, I might as well read it. And while reading it, I said, maybe I can give this writing thing a chance. I've had some ideas in my head. A year or two prior, a few friends and I attempted to write a screenplay. It was horrendous, and I hope it never sees the light of day. But while that was happening, I came up with other ideas for, screenplays that I thought would be good. So I just took those ideas and I applied them to, what could potentially be a book idea, which I eventually landed on The Replacement. So I just took that small idea and I cultivated it, and it grew until I had the full book.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about The Replacement? Just a bit about what it's about and its genre?
Oh, it's a mystery thriller. It's about a retired cop, Patrick Sullivan, who has a very troubled past. Actually, his past is the reason why he left the force. But he finds himself going back as a detective with the homicide unit to replace a retiring cop who's this legend amongst his peers. And there's a lot of friction between the two. And while all that friction is going on, they just so happen to be chasing down a sadistic, psychotic, brutal serial killer. So that's the gist of it.
Okay, so it's more in the thriller mystery genre. And I did read. I was doing a little reading on you beforehand, and saw really good reviews on The Replacement, but a few people said it was rather graphic. So was that your intention going in, or did it just kind of come out of the story? Or did you feel like it was graphic?
Yes, parts of it that are certainly graphic. And if you have a weak stomach, I don't suggest it. My aunt actually had to skip over parts, the murders, because they were so graphic. I would say the murder parts specifically are things that I, at the time, thought was really pushing my own envelope as far as what I'm willing to write in a book. And then I wrote Booth, and then I discovered I have a whole new... there's the line, and I just pushed it way further than I thought possible with The Replacement.
Okay, so that's a nice segue into Booth, because when I'd done the reading and I'd seen that there was, a lot of, that your first novel was a thriller, it was graphic, I was like, not really sure I want to read this book. It's going to keep me up at night. And then I started reading Booth, and it's not a thriller, it's not, it's definitely a different genre. So talk about the difference first. Well, why did you decide to go a completely different direction in terms of genre?
Well, there's the short answer, which I'll start with, is just the story that I came up with and I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. The longer answer is I never wanted to be an author who was stuck within the confines of one genre. I'm sure that works wonderfully for some people who can just write their thrillers or just write their love stories. But I'm a guy I like to say I'm an idea man. So I have all my ideas for different stories, and not all of them are, gruesome murders in thrillers or even science fiction like Booth. I have somewhere in my head I have a love story that I came up with, so maybe one day I'll do that. As long as the story grabs me enough to really want to write it, I'm going to write it. And plus, I think I'm opening up. Someone once said, "Don't you think you're alienating your audience by branching out?" And I said, "No, I don't. I think I'm opening more doors, than anything. Because if somebody reads Booth, who might not read thrillers, might pick up The Replacement because they liked my writing, and they might get into thrillers because I pick up The Replacement just because they're interested to see what else I did, and they might like it." And there's the flip side. Somebody who doesn't like science fiction or historical fiction, which both are in Booth, might read The Replacement and then pick up Booth and like that, and so forth as I expand in different genres. Mm-hmm. So I just didn't want to be, and it all works for Nicholas Sparks and whoever else. But like some of the biggest authors are authors that have branched out. Even James Patterson, whose Meat and Potatoes is thrillers, and he's writing children's books, I believe now. Mm-hmm. Yep. Stephen King's the horror writer, but if anyone who reads Stephen King a lot knows he's not just horror. Even J.K. Rowling, decided to branch out from children's books.
Yep. All right, and even within the book itself, there's multiple genres. You mentioned science fiction and historical fiction. I would say there's even a little bit of the supernatural, and there's a little bit of romance. I mean, you do have, it's not quote unquote a romance, but there is that relationship in there between the
I like the whole story in Booth. As without giving too much away, as twisted as it is, it's bare bones. It's a love story.
Yeah. It is. It's a dysfunctional love story, but it's a genuine love story. What's that?
I said, aren't they all?
Well, to a certain extent, I'm sure they are. So, when you think about writing Booth versus writing The Replacement, were there noticeable differences in how you wrote them, or in how the stories came to you?
The biggest thing that comes to mind is discipline, self-discipline. There was when you don't have a novel out before your first novel, you have all the time in the world to write that novel. The Replacement took me 4 years, and now there's a lot of stop and go. I was new at it. I didn't know what I was doing. I might still not know what I'm doing. But, so I had all the time in the world, and once it was done, and then it's like, time to put this out in the world. I decided this is something that I want to chase and take very seriously, so I couldn't wait another 4 years to put out a second book. So I guess from time management, I said I want this book out by the end of 2016. The Replacement came out at the beginning of 2015. So I started writing Booth maybe the end of 2014. So I made myself sit down, even at times when I didn't want to, and I wrote. I had to make sure that it got done, because I was working to promote The Replacement. I was getting readers, and I was getting good responses, which is great. So I knew that I was grabbing people's attention. So I knew I needed to get that second book out because you got to ride the momentum. As little as I had for at the time with The Replacement, I had to ride that and keep that wave going. And the same thing with my next book, and so forth and so forth. You just have to, if you're going to take this seriously, not just write to write, and whenever I'm done, I'm going to put out a novel, you have to have some kind of discipline.
Okay, so have you given yourself a timeline for your third novel?
I'm bouncing back between two deadlines.
Okay.
So right now, it's up in the air, but I'm working on it. And like I said, I'm making sure I sit to write.
Okay. Anything you can tell us about the new novel?
No. I have with every story, I have my basic plot points, and then I kind of sew those points together. I bridge them. And right now, I'm kind of in the process of bridging all my points together, so they're all kind of like scattered all over the place, and I'm kind of letting everything fall into place. So if I even try to explain it, people listening will probably be like, this book makes no sense. I like to think it's a departure, like I said, from the genres that I've done so far. Although if I had to say, it probably leaned a little more towards Booth with the more of a supernatural feel to it. But if you analyze the two, it's very different. It won't be as dark as Booth or The Replacement. I decided then I was going to chill, take a few steps back from pushing my own limits.
Okay. We do have to take our second break of the podcast, so we're going to take that break right now, but when we come back, we will be talking more with author Jason Pellegrini, and we will be talking about his novel, Booth. So stay tuned, and we will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. Today I am talking with author Jason Pellegrini, author of Booth and The Replacement. Let's talk about Booth. What was your inspiration for this story?
The inspiration for Booth came while I was reading Stephen King's 11/22/63, which is a story about a man who goes back in time to prevent the Kennedy assassination. While reading that, it's a fantastic read. I thought, wow, it would be really great if somebody wrote, a book that involved the Lincoln assassination in some way, not necessarily through time travel. And then I realized, well, I'm a writer, so if I, want that book written, I'll write it. I toyed around with some ideas. Some I dismissed because they just didn't work. One I thought was really good, got really psyched on it, told it to a friend, and he said, dude, that sucks. But, you gotta love those honest friends, because I would have wrote the book in it. Looking back on it, it didn't really make much sense. It made sense to me, but,
Okay.
So I was kind of deflated after that. So I was like, all right, there goes that idea. But the concept stuck with me. I wanted to do a book involving Lincoln's assassination. So I dwelled, and eventually, I came up with a new concept. which grew and grew. Like I said, with picking the replacement concept from the screenplay, it just stuck with me until it grew into something that I said, this is a legit story that I should go with. I told it to that same friend too, and he said, yeah, this is a much better idea. Go with this.
Great.
So his approval, not everything, but it was something considering he completely stomped all over, for lack of a better word, the first idea.
So there is that element of the Lincoln assassination, and it does play a part in the whole book, but I'd say, would you say maybe the first 2/3 are kind of the main character, who we're told pretty much in the first page that he is on death row, and he's looking back on his life before his execution. That looking back and the setting up of all of that's kind of about the first 2/3. So talk about Joseph Bateman, and just talk about him as a character. Describe some of the choices he makes, just as that character developed. How you brought him to the choices and the eventual result of those choices.
Well, Joseph's choices are they weren't really his own choices. I say early on, I put it in the first chapter that every choice he ever made was, destined to lead him to death row. So, but Joseph was always, even though he was his destiny, as far as his life was concerned, was out of his hands. He was always I like to say he's always a man who wanted redemption. He was always looking to get out of, the rut that he was in. For, I think rut is an understatement for the stuff that Joseph goes through.
Yeah.
He's just a man looking for, peace and harmony, and that goes beyond Joseph's mortal body into a grander scheme in the book, as we learn that, there's more to Joseph and why he can't find happiness than, meets the eye. So, that's Joseph in a nutshell. I mean, he's just a guy who wants so badly, like all of us, to have happiness.
Is there anything autobiographical in the book, would you say, or anything in Joseph that you see in yourself?
Do you mean, is any of the instances taken from personal experience? No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Some tragic things happened to Joseph, and I can happily say that I've experienced none of them.
Okay.
But to an extent, I think any writer who portrays believable characters, and that's quite a talent to have, pours a lot of themselves in one way emotionally into their characters. So even though what is happening to the character on the pages is not a reflection of the author, the emotion that a character is portraying certainly comes from the author, because we're all human. We've all experienced every emotion across the board, so why wouldn't we, pour our emotions into our writing? If we want the people to believe the characters were, presenting to them, which, if a writer doesn't want to do that, I think they need to find a different, passion or career choice. So I think the characters are the driving force of the story, if you ask me. Some people will say it's plot, I say it's characters.
Okay.
Characters carry the plot.
Sure. When we first talked after I finished reading the book, I said something like it was weird and compelling and uncomfortable for me as a reader. And compelling because, it sucked me in. I read it. I didn't have those points where you're like, I don't really feel like reading this book. The story was compelling. It takes you right through the end. Uncomfortable, though, because there are some heavy issues that are told in the story. There's domestic violence. There's racism. Talk about some of the reasoning behind those elements of the book.
So, I'll start with domestic violence is just because Joseph was a victim of that. It's something that happens. I mean, the book in the 1970s especially, and I've had people who unfortunately, were, I'm sure not to the extent that is portrayed in the book, but have, experienced some form of domestic violence and said that, I'm not too far off. And this is coming from somebody who grew up in a home where my father did not touch my mother. But again, I created scenarios, because that was the atmosphere I wanted. It was a decision I made that his father was an alcoholic and his mother, and I knew it wasn't going to be something that was comfortable, but it was something I felt I wanted in the story, something that helped build the character and advance the story. And I like to think there's somewhat of a payoff to everything that happens as far as, Joseph goes. As far as racism goes, the original concept for having racism in my book was the link to John Wilkes Booth, who, if in case nobody knows, John Wilkes Booth was a heavy white supremacist. It kind of deviated from the original connection. The connection between the two is never made in the story, but it was also something that I gave to some of the characters. It became, despite not being used with the connection to Booth, it was something that became part of the story to the point where I felt I couldn't take it out. And again, it's something that exists in this world. And it's something that definitely it isn't fun to write. It's definitely something that's not fun to see. Not that I've seen it firsthand, but whether on television or in other forms of literature or in movies. But again, these are just things that, like I said, I pushed myself to my utmost limit with Booth, and the racism is the reason why, domestic abuse is the reason why, and and rape. So, like I said, the next one is going to be a little lighter on the mood, 100%. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what you were saying before. I mean, those elements really do drive the story forward, and it kind of goes back to what you said about Joseph's decisions not always being his own, but all leading to death row. Like, his decisions all lead him there, his choices, and so those elements really do drive where he ends up.
Yeah, and I like to think I gave resolution to each of those subjects. I know the racism is definitely, there's a resolution. I mean, I'm not putting this stuff in there for no reason whatsoever.
Right.
And it's not for everyone. I mean, I had people who messaged me privately and said, listen, I'm sorry, I just couldn't finish your book. This, it's too heavy for me. And then some people, said, there's some heavy stuff in your book, but it's needed to drive the story forward. And it's kind of people kind of telling me what I already knew. Mm-hmm. And it's good to see that other people see it that way too. And not I'm just doing it just for doing it. And worse scenario is that I don't want people to read my story and say, well, he's incorporating racism into his story, so therefore he's a racist.
Right.
Stephen King wrote it on writing that he at the time, which was 2000, he got letters almost daily. Letters, that's like ancient, right? He's calling himself a bigot, a homophobe, everything. And he said, and this stuck with me when I read on writing, that you can't compromise your characters for what other people might think, because then you're compromising your story. And I like to think, for the most part, people understand the difference between the writer and the story.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you addressing that issue, because I know that some people, as they read the book, might have some questions about why you chose to include some of the things that you chose, in terms of the racism, the domestic abuse, the rape, those sorts of things. So thank you for addressing that. I want to move now to the historical fiction aspects of the book in terms of Lincoln's assassination and John Wilkes Booth and the connection that they have to the main character Joseph Bateman's life.
Were you interested in Lincoln and Lincoln's assassination before this book, or was that something that you learned about as you thought of the story and did the research?
I always had an interest in Lincoln. In general, I remember vaguely always thinking he was the coolest president. But, I think sort of we learned about him most in school. Then I read Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Which, forget the movie, and forget the silly concept on paper, read the book. Because he takes Lincoln's life and he just incorporates vampires into it. But it kind of reminded me that Lincoln was such a tragic character in life who was surrounded by death and depression, and we're always attracted to the dark characters. That's why everyone's interested in the Joker and not Batman. Not that Lincoln was evil, but there was something to him, I think, that drew me to him, and I think it was the fact that his life was so shrouded in tragedy, including his ending. And it was just always, every time a documentary came on, if I was flipping and it was on, I'd stay on it. I eventually, would read some stuff, and there's some historical, not even textbooks, historical books, nonfiction books that are just horrendous to read. But anything on Lincoln, kept me compelled. So that was the catalyst of it all. So, like I said, when I was reading King's book about Kennedy's assassination, I was like, well, somebody should write a book about Lincoln's, which I decided would be me. So I was well versed enough to be able to form a plot and incorporate Lincoln's assassination into it, because I had already had an interest in him and had known enough to create a story. I had to later on go into Google to, piece everything together, and thank goodness for Google, because without it, I don't think the story would have been able to get written.
Unlike Joseph Bateman's character, who is alive before the internet and has to actually go to the library and use the card catalog.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
So, let's talk about your writing. Do you have a favorite place to write? Do you have a schedule for writing? I know you said sometimes you don't want to write, but what's your ideal schedule if you had one?
I used to be a morning person. I used to write in the morning, but lately it's been the evening. It comes and goes in waves. Sometimes I can't do anything at night. I got to do everything in the morning. It's just whenever it hits me. Like I said, I try to do it every day, and I try to hit 1,000 words. Sometimes I exceed my 1,000 words, and sometimes I write a sentence. It takes me half hour. I hate it. I delete it. Then I close my laptop at the time, and it's live to fight another day. As far as places, when the weather permits lately, I've been going out on my deck. I have my lounge chair, my little tiki torch, my little lights. So when it's nighttime, I turn the little lights on. It's a nice ambiance. I guess it gets the creative juices flowing. But New York weather has been bipolar. And, it's either 80 degrees or 40 degrees. Other than that, I have a little workstation. And, it's where I brainstorm and write, or attempt to write.
Right. Do you have any... Well, you have, your rituals. Do you have any rituals that might be a little strange? I know some writers have their quirks.
Yes, I got asked this not too long ago in an interview, and it didn't even dawn on me that I had it until they asked me, and I said, okay, that is weird. So my original, whenever I was stumped and I didn't want to give up on writing for the night, if I knew I had to if I closed the laptop, it would leave me, so I had to stick it out to get it just out. I used to smoke, so I used to go outside for a cigarette, just step away. I quit smoking 5 years ago on May 29th.
Almost your anniversary?
Almost. I never thought I'd make it as far. But after I stopped smoking, I still would go outside. Like, I would hold my two fingers out. I don't want to say that I would bring it to my mouth if I was smoking a cigarette, but I'm convinced that I did. Maybe now that I created the imagery in my head, I'm doing it. But I used to go outside, pace back and forth, as if I was smoking a cigarette without smoking a cigarette. If I'm in my backyard, that's fine. But if I'm at like a Starbucks doing that, people are probably like, what is this lunatic? Starbucks probably lost some business. Like, people are like, oh, stay away from this guy outside Starbucks. So that eventually got replaced with me heading to my couch whenever I'm stumped and throwing my feet up on the back of the couch and hanging off of it so my head is above the floor. I honestly don't know why I do this. It's not like I think the blood rushing to my head is, creating anything other than me getting lightheaded. It's just something I do. I mean, I think I just need to step away from the computer, and instead of like pacing my kitchen, or this is just what I do. It's just like I needed to step away even though I didn't smoke.
Right. Well, it's a change of perspective.
Yeah. So that's my weird habit.
Well, it could be worse. I mean, I don't know what would be worse, but I'm sure there are lots of things that are strange that people do. So, in terms of your favorite authors, who would you say your favorite authors are, or authors that you find inspirational?
Well, I brought him up a few times, so the obvious one is Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
The guy I think is a genius. Even though sometimes I'll read some of his stuff and I'm like, it's not for me. But I think by reading your favorite authors, you not only do you learn what you want to put in your story, you also learn what you don't want in your stories. But as far as King, more times than not, he's hit than a miss. And I think it's because he puts into his stories a lot of stuff that I think should go in the stories. I write the story that I like, and I enjoy reading Stephen King. It's because that's a story that I enjoy, which is therefore the story that I write. I'm not saying I'm by any means close to Stephen King, although I have gotten some comparisons to him in reviews, and which already is probably the top compliment I will ever get. But I see so much of what I think should go into a story in Stephen King, and I think that's why I'm so drawn to him more than anyone else. But I mean, not saying I don't enjoy other authors. It's just he's my go-to. As far as other influences go, it's not even some authors it's just storytellers in general. Like Joss Whedon comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Buffy was a huge impact on me as a writer because after the 7th season of Buffy ended, I guess I wasn't satisfied. So I went to my computer, and this is years before I even decided I was going to be a writer, and I wrote a 22-episode season 8 of the show.
So kind of like the graphic novels before the graphic novels.
Kind of. So I'm candid. He's fan fiction. What happens in mine is what happens. Sorry, Josh.
That's fascinating.
But no, the way Buffy, I think a novel's a lot like a television show, more than it is a movie. That's why I think novels that are adapted into television shows are a lot better than movies. Because you always want to keep the reader reading, you always want to keep the viewer viewing.
Mm-hmm.
So J.J. Abrams is another example. He's an amazing storyteller. Lost was just, for the most part, a mind-blowing TV show. And that's just stuff that, whether I'm aware of it or not, I'm learning and picking up things on how to tell a story. And as far as like writing goes and how to write, it's just reading in general. I'm a big fan of J.K. Rowling. Frederick Bateman, I believe his name is. He wrote A Man Called Ove, or I recently learned A Man Called Uwe.
Okay.
I believe was the real name. I loved that book. I went out and bought the rest of his stuff. I'm going to plan on reading it. Just reading in general. I try to read as much as possible so I can just learn. You know, that's like, I want to play guitar, but I'm not going to listen to any bands. You're not going to learn anything.
Right.
You know, you may have your main influences. Like for me, it was Metallica, but they got me started. But I learned so much more from listening to so much other music.
Right.
It's like I love King, but you know, I don't specifically think King's the best at writing love stories. So I get those influences from elsewhere, including TV.
Right.
So my influences come from everywhere. It's not so much writers as much as it is good storytellers. If you tell a story well, you're going to captivate me and have my attention, and I'm going to learn from that.
All right. So
that's advice. That's a piece of advice for writers. Just pay attention.
Pay attention. Okay. So in terms of your books, you recently hit a milestone with your books. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I recently sold a total of 1,000 between the two books.
Mm-hmm.
As of yesterday, Booth itself hit the 300 copy mark.
Okay, great.
And today, it's past the 300 copy mark. But I think when every person who decides they want to write gets into writing and decides they want to publish, they're thinking the millions. They're looking so far into the future, they don't even realize it. There's thousands of other milestones that come before that.
Right.
So when you finally get out there, go ahead. I implore everyone to dream big, but at the same time, realize you're not selling 1 million copies the first day out. But I think once you realize that, and those small milestones happen, like the 100, the 200, the 500s, you appreciate them more because you realize it's just a step to that million or multi-million.
Right. Celebrate the milestones. I agree. So congratulations. That's awesome. And is that just books, or are those Kindle books? Is it hard copies?
That is purchases from my Kindle, Amazon, and my personal website. That's not including Kindle Unlimited because they don't report books. They report pages read. So
Okay.
it's kind of can't really get a exact number from that.
Okay.
So technically, I guess it's more.
Even better. Great.
Yeah.
So I think we're it's about time to wrap up. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you, or that you would like to mention about your books or your writing?
No, I do want to take the time to thank everyone who went out of their way to read an unknown author. Like when I put out the replacement, as every author is, the first time they put out their book is an unknown author who just decided to self-publish and take a chance. And I've been so fortunate to get amazing feedback on both books. I can't please everyone, but as you can check online, I like to think I'm pleasing enough people to where I should and will keep writing. And, you know, if I was put the replacement out and I was getting 1-star reviews across the board, then, you know, I might not have a reason to at least publish. Maybe I would continue writing, but all you people have given me a reason to keep on writing, and, you know, that is an amazing feeling. It's a terrible thing for an author to say, but it's impossible to describe. So thank you. Seriously, thank you.
Well, and thank you. I really want to say thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, and to, I thank you for introducing me to your work. I look forward to your next novel, whenever it is and whatever it is.
And thank you for having me. This was my first podcast, so if I butchered it, you know, I mean, I guess blame me, but it was my first time, so don't be too hard.
You did just fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you again to my guest, author Jason Pellegrini, the author of The Replacement and Booth. I hope you will check out both of them. I especially can recommend Booth, even though I was a little leery about it when I first started it. I felt a little uncomfortable, but it really is a compelling story. The characters, despite their flaws, are compelling. You find yourself really wanting to find out what's going to happen, where it's going to go, where this is all leading. And as I said, it does have some darker elements. We talked about that a little bit in the interview. It's not a rated PG-13 book. There is language, and there's some uncomfortable language, so just know that going in. But the story definitely makes up for that, and it does contribute to the furthering of the plot, to the development of the character, to the story as a whole. So I recommend that you go pick up this book, and if you like that, try his other book, The Replacement. I am looking forward to find out what he's going to write next, what genre he's going to explore, what time period, his characters, etc. So thank you again to author Jason Pellegrini. That's all the time that we have for today's podcast. As always, you can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can download the podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all the apps that you use for your mobile devices for podcasts. And you can follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, GSMC Book Review. Thank you again for joining me today. I hope you'll join me again next week. I'll be talking about fantasy and one of my favorite fantasy authors, Terry Brooks. So join me for that. But in the meantime, go out and get yourself lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.